Welcome back to the Mindful Hunter podcast. I'm your host as always, Jay Nichol. And today we are going to do a Q&A on my recent solo winter mountain goat hunt. Threw up a little question box on Instagram a few days ago and got flooded with a ton of super interesting questions. Gear choices, scouting choices, lessons learned. What am I going to do different next time? Even some camera related stuff, all kinds of shit. So I got a nice fresh cup of coffee. The drinking of which I will most likely edit out because the sound of people drinking and eating on podcasts absolutely infuriates me, if you want me to be honest about it. Now, I do have my phone in my hand, and the reason I have my phone in my hand is that I have the questions saved as pictures. So I'm going to walk through these one at a time. So quick little housekeeping, just threw up my final review for the Sea to Summit Telos TR2 after having the rain issues on my sheep hunt, the warranty stuff going on with Sea to Summit, getting the new tent, had to retest it, do a bunch of stuff. That video is now up and live on YouTube. Go give it a watch. Let me know what you think. Also, would you like me to throw up the audio of those reviews as like secondary podcasts? They would never replace the main show once a week, but I could throw them up as additional podcasts. Send me a comment. Let me know what you think of that idea. I just know for some people it'd be easier to listen to on the way to work, and they don't necessarily have time to sit down and watch a full half-hour YouTube review. Give me your feedback on that. The giveaway for the Yeti Roadie cooler on Mindful Reviews went amazing. Got about 10 new members in the last week there who wanted a chance to win. That is super encouraging. Up next, we have a Polar heart rate monitoring fitness watch valued at $500 Canadians that I'm going to give away March 1st. And I'm going to do my best to just keep hammering the giveaways once a month until I run out of gear and then to give away. And then we'll go back to once every 3 months. But I really want to kickstart the community, and everybody's doing a great job at engaging in the community and signing up and all that kind of stuff. So I want to do whatever I can to keep that momentum going and show my gratitude for the community itself. As always, if you can engage with the podcast in any way, shape, or form, like, comment, share, subscribe, all of it helps drive engagement with the algorithm, and I greatly appreciate it. And if you want to get in touch with me, jay@mindfulhunter.com, Instagram mindful_hunter, YouTube @mindfulhunter. I'm always here if you have any questions. So the one thing that I do want to talk about before we get in the Q&A is this little Rokslide business. I find this super interesting, and it was funny. I didn't really get mad at all. So if anybody was not following my stories yesterday, Rokslide has asked me to no longer post on their forums. That means no gear reviews, no hunt films, and I was told that because Mindful Reviews is a commercial interest, that I would have to be a sponsor of Rokslide if I was going to post my reviews or hunt films on Rokslide. I don't really have a problem with that. I get it. That's the way they've chosen to run their forum. They're the ones who make the rules. They own it. No problem. I won't post there anymore. I just wanted to make a note of it because if that was how you stayed up to date with my reviews, you're not going to be seeing them anymore. So I would recommend probably subscribing on YouTube. I think that's the best way. Obviously, joining Mindful Reviews is ultimately the best way, but I understand if you don't want to pay for it and you just want to watch my reviews for free. No hard feelings. That's how the vast majority of people consume my content, and I'm super cool with that. Now, I did want to do a little economics 101 for people because I think part of what frustrates me the most about the way the hunting industry is headed and the way content creators generate revenue and the way they manage the relationship with their audience really gets under my skin. So there's a three-way relationship between a business, its customers, and its product. And the thing is, if you're not the customer, then you're the product. You can see this most clearly in apps, because if you get an app for free, but then they track your data on that app and they sell that data, or they feed you advertising on that app in order to generate revenue. Suffice it to say, if they generate revenue any other way other than you as a customer paying for it, you are now the product. You are not the customer. The customer is the one who feeds the revenue to the business. The product is the individual or the service or the piece of gear that creates the opportunity for revenue generation. So in a free app-like environment, the product isn't even the app. The product is the means through which you, the end user, become the product. Because what they're actually selling to the customers is your time, your attention, and your wallet. And those customers are brands that are either A, paying for the tracked data from your time spent on that app, and then they're using that in a variety of ways to create revenue somewhere else, or the clients are advertisers or brands that pay to feed you advertising while you're on that app. And I think most people understand that. Where I think it falls flat is in the relationship with the content creators, the brands, the forums, the YouTube channels that you engage with. So let's take a major podcast. Not mine. I'm not a major podcast. I'm a little guy. I have 0 sponsors. I do this because I enjoy it and because it feeds traffic to the rest of my platform. So it's part of the whole entire ecosystem. But let's look at one with major sponsors. You know the guys I'm talking about. There's like 14 minutes of mind-numbing ads at the beginning of every episode. You are not the customer of that podcast. That podcast may be useful to you, but understand this. The customers of that podcast are the brands that advertise on that podcast. That podcaster's primary concern is pleasing those brands and those advertisers. And the way they do that is by increasing the size of their audience and increasing the amount of time that audience spends on that podcast. Now, this can be done altruistically. I'm not saying that by default, these podcasts don't have your best interest at heart, but here's what I am saying. There's a conflict of interest because they're being paid by one half, they're not being paid by the other half, okay? Those brands who advertise on these podcasts create a financial incentive for those podcasters. So now they become the number one priority. You as the listener are no longer the number one priority. So those brands are paying that podcaster for the right to your time, your attention, and your wallet. So you can see how I have issues. Let's take the new Meat Eater podcast, the Gear Lab. I'm sorry, bullshit. There is no way that a podcast that is owned by the same entity that owns First Light, Phelps Games Calls, FHF Gear, can possibly not be biased. Like it's insanity to me that they would even have the chutzpah to start a gear podcast. I listened to one episode and in under 14 minutes, I heard 17 recommendations for products that they owned. Okay. They might be okay products. They might not be okay products. Here's the thing. Because you're owned by the same company that owns First Light, FHF, and Phelps, I don't give a shit because I'm not going to waste my time trying to decide if I should trust you. I feel the same way, and I hate to call people out. I'm not going to name names, but y'all know who I'm talking about. They're the content creators that are always wearing the same boots. They're always spouting the same brands. They're always saying the same shit. They get paid by those brands. Those brands are now the number one priority for those content creators. You, as the consumer of their content, are not. You are their product, and they are selling you to those brands. They are selling your time, your attention, and your wallet to those brands. And in exchange for that, those brands pay them. How on earth can anyone think this would not bias you? Yes, there may be mutually beneficial relationships where you are able to find products that you do believe in, that do line up with your audience, and you can be open and honest. And yes, perhaps sometimes it works out perfectly. I have a very hard time believing that that's the case every time. And because you've introduced a financial incentive, I'm not going to waste my time trying to tease it out. I'm just not going to believe you. I'm not going to spend my time consuming your content because you are financially incentivized to tell me whatever you need to tell me so that I go buy products from the brands that are paying you to create that revenue for them. This is why I started Mindful Reviews. Okay? Yes, there is a membership fee because in the real world, shit costs money and people need to eat. However, by being transparent about that membership fee and by creating the end user, you as the client, and being open and honest about that, there's no conflict of interest. My first priority is the end user, the consumer of content, the audience, the followers, whoever you want to call them, the people who are listening to this and watch my reviews. You are my number one priority. I don't have to care about the brands at all. I buy shit from brands. Why do I care if they like me? Sometimes they give me stuff, but I don't have any financial relationships with them, and I'm under no obligation whatsoever to give them positive reviews. My one and only obligation is to the end user, the content consumer, you, the audience member. And I don't understand why this is so difficult for everyone to understand. And I don't understand why more people aren't embracing this model. And I do think that as we mature and as we see more evolution in this space, more people are going to become aware of the true nature of relationships and begun to question like who they spend their time engaging with and who they, reshare and repost and who gets their trust and, who they go to for product guidance. But this whole Rokslide thing kind of kicked me off, or kind of kicked this off for me, because how does Rokslide generate revenue? Rokslide sells advertising to brands. So there is no way that you can sell advertising space to brands and not be incentivized to become a welcoming space for those brands. I'm not calling anybody's integrity into question, but you only have to look at the financial incentives to understand why people do things or what they might do. And so I can think of another, there's a particularly large online e-commerce platform that does a lot of reviews. And somebody hit me up yesterday and he was like, when's the last time you heard one negative thing in any of their reviews? And I started thinking about it. I'm like, you're 100% right. Yes, they put up a lot of reviews. Yes, they put up a lot of valuable information. But because they sell every single product that they do a review of, they are financially incentivized. Like these brands are their partners. They're selling their gear. If they rip these guys apart, they're not going to let them sell their gear anymore, and you're not going to go buy their gear from their website. So again, there's an inherent conflict of interest. So while I think you can pick and choose, and there's I think there's some good possibilities on forums, and I think there's some good reviews from this e-com, what you got to do is like tease it out. And it was like, that just seems like a waste of time for me. So all of this is the entire reason. And it was also because of the embedded marketing and hunting films. It was like all these like First Light Vortex whores who are like doing YouTube videos, and like the whole thing is a big commercial for these companies with big ad budgets. And it's just like, I just got so sick of watching it. I'm like, I'm going to make other stuff. I'm going to make stuff that's not one big long commercial. And I'm going to make hunt films that are actually about the hunt, not about the gear that I'm wearing. Now, if people have questions about it afterwards, feel free to ask me. But that was the inspiration for this whole thing, that I was just fed up with this consistent conflict of interest and this kind of like barrage of marketing spiel constantly embedded in all of the content. all that is to say, listen, Mindful Reviews is there if you want to join. If you don't, doesn't bother me at all. You still have a question, hit me up. I guarantee you will not find a person who has said that they have sent me an email or a DM and I haven't replied. I reply to everybody, member or not. If something I have learned can benefit you in some way, you're welcome to it. And I do that. Yes, I do that in good faith, but I also do that because I understand how, group dynamics work. And if I am positive and engaged and helpful with every single person that I come in contact with, that's just going to spread. It just has to. And people will understand that I have integrity and that I'm here to help and that I'm not biased, and the word will get out. And it does, and it has. My podcast grows every week. The YouTube channel grows every week. Mindful Review membership grows every week. It's not exploding. It's not going to, I'm not going to retire overnight, but I know I'm doing the right things because we continue to trend in the right direction. I love how ranty I get. I would apologize for that, but I'm not going to. It is who I am. I didn't plan on going on this huge thing, but I get deeply passionate about this because, you guys spend a lot of money on gear and you spend a lot of money going on hunts. And it's important to me that the people you get advice from are acting with integrity. And if I'm honest with you, I don't see a whole lot out there these days. Okay, that's out of the way. Let's dive headfirst into this Q&A. First question, why snowshoes, not skis? This is a great question, and I have been hammered with this question. I think when you watch the video, because you see me on some snowed-in logging roads and you see me up in the Alpine, you're under this impression that I spend a lot of time on these open, contiguous chunks of terrain. That is just not the case. The vast majority is highly broken, multi-dimensional terrain, heavily timbered, lots of windfall. There's no way you're using skis on 90% of where I went on that goat hunt. Just a lot of that stuff isn't particularly scenic, so it doesn't make the cut into the final film. Now, are there areas where skis would be useful? 100%. Up at the top, it's not such a strong argument because you need to be on crampons and snowshoes the whole way up through the timber. You would be carrying the skis kind of inefficiently. You'd be carrying them a long way for a little bit of benefit when you got into the Alpine. Now down below, if I had skis to go from the sled to the timber's edge, I would have saved at least a couple hours of snowshoeing for sure. And I could have just left those skis at timber's edge and picked them up on my way back down. Now that is an interesting possibility that I would like to explore. But there's one more element here too. And that is the learning curve to skis with a full pack. Just about anybody can get the hang of snowshoes in an hour or two. Now, there are some tricky things, turning around, backing up, getting over windfall. There's some more technical elements that take a little while to get. But for the most part, you're going to figure it out and you're not going to fall too many times. Everybody will eventually in a little bit. And it is a pain in the ass to try and get up with snowshoes. Yeah, it's brutal. The thing that I'm curious about is I haven't cross-country skied since I was 10 years old with my grandma. I have no, split board experience. I have no kind of backcountry alpine skiing experience. And I wonder, I've talked to some people and they're like, yeah, man, staying upright on those skis with a 80-pound pack is a different animal. So there's two factors that go into why I don't have skis. Number one, the use case just isn't that strong. It's maybe a couple miles on each of these hunts where I would actually be able to use them. And number two, there's a learning curve that I just haven't had the opportunity to take advantage of yet. So there's that. All right, up next. How did the tube snowshoes do compared to the MSR in steep terrain? I will say that if you were just comparing the steep terrain performance, I give a slight edge to the MSR because the MSR have teeth on the bottom all the way around the outer edge, but they are so useless when it comes to 4 hours of snowshoeing and I bent another pair and a half. Like those MSR Lightnings are garbage. I do not recommend them for any case. Like there's just, I don't see a strong value proposition for them whatsoever. And I will be doing an MSR Lightning versus Atlas Montane review, hopefully next week before I head out on my next winter goat hunt. Yes, I'm going back. The Atlas were bomb-proof. I beat the shit out of them for a week. They didn't have quite as much traction going up and down steep stuff. There's another pair of Atlas. I can't remember the names of them. And they're kind of a cross between a tubular design and a flat metal design where they have almost like a boxed in metal frame. And then on the bottom, they have this kind of like flat metal cut into teeth. I would really like to experiment with those because I think those are highly promising. They didn't have the right size in at Smithers when I was in there. And I was talking to the girl who was working there and I was just like, okay, regardless of anything else, any other factor, which of these two do you think is stronger? And she was like, I think the tubes, the Montanes. And so I was like, okay, because ultimately I can slip a little bit. I don't care. I cannot have perfect traction. I don't care. But if the snowshoes bend or break, I'm done. So I was like, first find the strongest, then start adding in the other factors. Because here's the other element. The Atlas Montanes aren't the widest snowshoes in the world. Somebody sent me a link, Ian from Manitoba. And I think they're called, I forget what they're called. I'll figure it out and I'll post them in the show notes. But they're a particularly wide snowshoe that would give me as a large guy much better flotation. My concern with that is when you're in the timber and in windfall, sometimes even the narrower snowshoes, it's like all you can do to get up and around things. Like you're always balancing agility with flotation, with strength. Like backcountry, that is the art and science of backcountry hunting. There is no perfect gear. There are several variables that you need to take into account with each piece of gear. And it's like those D&D personality charts where you have like this much, intelligence and this much conditioning and this much attack power. Like every piece of gear has these little sliders and you can like have a little bit more of this, but that means you get a little bit less of that. And so you're always trying to find for you and that hunt the perfect blend of characteristics for that particular piece of gear. Right now, you would be hard pressed to pull me away from these Montanes. I was super happy with them. They performed incredibly well. And they didn't break your bank. Like they're like a $300 after tax, maybe even less. It might have been $269 or something like that. Okay, up next. How would you e-scout differently knowing what you know now about the terrain and snow levels? This is a really good question. I am still at odds with where goat actually live in the wintertime. I shouldn't say that I'm at odds, but I hear a little bit conflicting information from some different people that I'm going to for my learning. So I would say I'm still at a place in my goat hunting development where I'm like 80% sure the type of terrain I'm looking for goats, but then I hit these areas where I'm like, well, one guy said that could be good goat country, and another guy said that's not good goat country. And I don't have enough experience yet where I've made up my mind. But I will say, and I'm not going to get into all the factors because like I say, I'm still learning. I would say I have a different set of filters that I would be putting terrain through. And it's really hard to explain this, but what I'm looking for is very steep country that has timber close by, but is still accessible, right? So it can't be on the side of a cliff 2,000 meters up. A, there's going to be no timber, and B, it's not accessible. It can't be surrounded by sheer bluffs because timber might be right there and the goats might be right there, but I won't be able to hike there. So I'm looking for this perfect blend of like really steep country, some exposed rock faces, broken up with little islands of timber. That's probably the best explanation I've got so far. And going back, my unit didn't have a ton of this stuff. I think my unit was probably a very good, late fall, even summer unit. I know there's a guide who hunts in there regularly. I know where he saw goats before. They've taken goats out of there. They're there. I don't think my unit lent to winter hunting particularly well. A, it didn't have a lot of the aforementioned terrain. And B, access was difficult. And I think the access problem could be solved if I knew the area better and maybe had a hunting partner. There were some areas I wanted to snowmobile that I decided not to because I was solo. And there's some areas I would have hiked into if I had had a partner with me. So I think looking for the terrain that I described is one way I would change my e-scouting, and looking for terrain that was accessible in deep winter conditions, like either logging roads that I know I can sled down or hikeable terrain where I can access it off some type of road or highway, and then I know I'm only 2 or 3 kilometers, because you just can't cover. You're not doing any 10-mile days on snowshoes. Like, I have done this enough now that you need to drastically reduce the amount of ground, your estimation of the amount of ground that you think you're going to need to cover on a goat hunt. So those are the 2 biggies: deep winter access and a better definition of what good goat country looks like. Will you apply for the same LEH next year? No, I won't. I have some better ideas for next year. I'm curious on your clothing system. What extra clothing did you take in your pack? So if you want a specific information about all the clothes I wore, 2 episodes back, I broke down everything that I took with me. I will go over the clothing system real quickly again. So I wore a pair of boxers and a pair of the Blizzard Aerolite bib pants from Sitka, which are almost like a insulated ski or snowboarding pant, like that, but thinner, and they're waterproof, and they're bibs. And I wore that on the bottom the whole time. Never took them off, never put on long johns, slept in them every night. Literally, except when I went to a hotel to dry them out, I never took those pants off. And I wore darn tough over-the-calf socks the entire time. No, that's not right. For winter, I prefer the smart wool ones. I wore smart wool over the calf socks. So there's from the bottom down, taken care of. Didn't pack anything extra. I didn't bring a puffy pant, nothing. Now, let's go from the waist up. I wore a short sleeve Sitka core lightweight t-shirt. That I wore constantly, never took it off. Above that, I wore an ambient hoodie from Sitka. That I wore constantly, never took it off. There was one night where I was sleeping where I got so warm that I took it off. Other than that, I hiked in it, I slept in it, I did everything in it. And there's a theme here that I'm going to get to. Now, in addition to that, I also brought a Kelvin Aerolite puffy jacket. It's a synthetic puffy. That was pretty much my primary temperature modulator and my moisture management tool. Okay? So the minute I would stop walking, the puffy jacket would go on. I would be soaking wet, and there's a question about moisture management, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that here. I'll get into it later. I would be soaking wet, I would be hot, but I would put that puffy on anyways, and I would take my little break, and you kind of dry out and cool down as you're sitting there. At night, I would wear that to bed until all of my underlayers were dry. Then I would take it off, roll it up, stick it in a dry bag, and put it back on in the morning when I got out of the tent. I never hiked in it. I only wore it when I was at camp, glassing, or stopping for some kind of break in order to manage temperature and moisture. And I took a Sitka Jetstream beanie, like kind of a thin toque. That's it. Okay. Now, I did have a Blizzard kind of parka from Sitka that I wore for the snowmobiling, but every time I got to the end of a snowmobile trail, I had a dry bag that I would keep in the boot of the snowmobile. I would take it out, I would stuff that parka in, and I would clip it to the handlebars. And then when I got back, I could put the parka back on and ride out. I never put it in my backpack, and I never used it while I was hiking. Now, on average, temperatures were -5 degrees Celsius during the day and got down to around -10 or 15 at night. So this was not a super cold winter goat hunt by any stretch of the imagination. Last time I was up in Stewart, I was seeing like -20, -25. That's a different conversation altogether. And that was it. I could get into my glove system, but it's a bit more of a complicated system, conversation. Let's just leave it to the clothes for now. So here's the takeaway for me. In a winter hunt, you don't want a ton of extra clothes in your backpack. You're already carrying like climbing rope and crampons and ice axes and like just an ungodly amount of extra stuff. The last thing you need is extra puffy pants and extra shirts and extra this and extra that. What you got to do is find a contained system. So for me, that was the Blizzard bib pants, the Core Light t-shirt, and the ambient hoodie. That was like my battle suit, my suit of armor. I did everything in that. I hiked in it. I sledded in it. I slept in it. I ate in it, everything. And then you want like one extra piece that you can use to increase your ability to evacuate moisture. And other than that, that's it. So that's what I found most beneficial to me because it was simple. And here's the thing. It's such a challenging hunt. You're never going to get away from not sweating. Like you can't hike up those steep runs in snowshoes. I mean, you're soaking wet with sweat in 15 minutes. Like there's nothing you're going to ever do about that, especially carrying an 80-pound pack on snowshoes or crampons. Like it's just, so the question you need to ask yourself is what can I wear that will dry quickly? And for me, that's synthetic. I never wear down anymore. I still have a down quilt that I use from time to time, but 99% of my gear is synthetic. And that's a complete opposite from 3 years ago. Over the last 3 years, the more demanding hunts I've started doing, the less I trust down. Like it just doesn't do what I need it to do as far as moisture management. I think you could have a different approach to clothing and moisture management, and I think down could work very well for you. But with my approach, which is like, let's stay simple. I don't want to change a whole lot. I don't want to bring a whole lot of extra stuff. I don't want to have to care if I get wet. Synthetic rules everything. So that's what I did for backup clothes. Am I contacting MSR about their snowshoes again? I am not. So the last time I blew apart a pair of MSR snowshoes, we went back and forth. I showed them my hunting video. They were super impressed. They were like, wow, you really destroyed those things. And they made me a deal. They said, listen, we will send you a replacement pair, but you need to promise to not ask for a second pair. Because even though on the website, it clearly says that these things are rated for 300 plus pounds, that has to be on ideal conditions. Flat, set snow. You're not, spanning the entire snowshoe with weight distribution. You are not going up really stiff stuff. You're not jumping from pieces of windfall and getting things caught, like just not meant for any of that. So, and that's why I took them on this hunt. I was like, maybe I was just too hard on them last time. And they're $300 snowshoes. And I'd already paid for them. And they gave me this warranty pair. I'm like, what am I going to go spend another $300 pair? And that's exactly what I ended up doing. Anyways, I promised I wouldn't ask for another pair. So my lesson learned, not built for me. Would you ever consider a hot tent in future hunts like this? Yes and no. Yes, I would consider a hot tent for a winter goat hunt, but not one like this. When you're doing a mobile hunt like this, where you could be setting up a different camp every night, everything is going on your back, you have no idea if you're going to have access to wood, a hot tent is just impractical. And in my opinion, it only serves as a psychological benefit. Like if you have a high quality synthetic bag and a high quality winter down sleeping pad, you can be drenched to your core and dry out overnight. Now, it's highly uncomfortable, but that's just a psychological annoyance. That's not an actual problem. Yes, would getting into a hot tent at night be enjoyable? Would it give your mind a break? Would it make you feel better? Yeah, but so what? I don't care about that. What I care about is my ability to perform. And I can achieve the exact same level of dryness by 6 a.m. by climbing into a sleeping bag soaking wet and just staying there until all my gear is dry as I can by carrying a hot tent with all the extra accessories required with me. Also, the snow conditions were such that setting up a teepee would have been a nightmare. Like, you would have needed a couple hours to set up tent or set up camp every night. The reason I'm saying that is I had to flatten out these large areas, and after they'd been flattened out for a couple hours, they had frozen enough that pegs would work, but that snow was so dry. It was like fine sand. There was no way, even snow pegs weren't going to work in that stuff. You would have had to find like setting up a teepee just would have been an absolute nightmare. And I don't know of many freestanding hot tent options. Then you got to carry the actual stove with you. Then you got to find wood every night. Because another couple people were asking me like, why didn't you have a fire at night? Again, it serves a psychological benefit, but not a practical one. I want people to think in terms of like a caloric equation. Like, how many calories does it cost me to execute this action? And what is the benefit of that action? How is it going to return? Because if my currency is calories and energy, when I spend my calories and energy, what am I getting back? I can crawl into a sleeping bag and it requires 0 calories. Okay? No extra energy, no extra time. If I build a fire at night, I got to walk around for an hour. I got to try and find dry wood. Then once you do find dry wood, have you ever had a fire on the ground in the Alpine when there's 6 to 7 feet of snow on the ground? I'll tell you what happens. The thing just sinks into the friggin' ground. And like 40 minutes after you start it, it's in like this tunnel and there's no actual heat coming up from it. Now, if you're in the timber, if you can scrape down to like a needle base, like I'm not saying this is the case all the time, but when you are on deep, deep snow in a deep winter hunt and you have a mobile camp that you're carrying on your back, you're trying to stay as light, as efficient as possible. And any of these things that make you feel better while nice aren't necessary. And you're trying to like figure out, what do I need to survive? Everything after that is like a cherry on top. All of that being said, I'm actually looking at finding winter goat hunts now where I could do like a pretty long sled ride in, try and find some sled trails up into the Alpine, and then set up a base camp. So I could actually pull a skimmer behind the sled. I'll even bring in like a box of fire logs with me. Big old teepee, nice cot, big old wood stove, and set up a big ass base camp. And then maybe I could spike camp out from there. Maybe I could just do day hunts from there. Now, under that situation, I'm super down with a hot tent. But again, those are two different style hunts. You see a lot of people doing the bison hunts this way. My buddy Todd just killed a giant this year. They used more of a wall tent, but same thing. They took in sleds. They set up a big tent. It was like pretty comfortable. And then you can like push hard all day. And you know, if you get back to this like comfortable environment and there, because you're setting it up in advance, I think the caloric equation is working out in your benefit. Because when you get home every day, there's not a whole lot you got to do. So that's my 2 cents on a hot tent. How did the K4 handle? The K4 is unequivocally my favorite backpack I have ever worn. And I have a prototype version. And I know there's been some changes to the final production models that make it even better. My production version should be here in the next couple weeks. The instant it shows up, I will film my full-length review and give you guys all of my feedback. But as it stands right now, because they've released it, I don't mind sharing it. There's, for my body type and the way I hunt, that pack is perfect. Now, I was running the 7200, which is more like 7800 once you add the lid. And I've asked that they send me a 5000 because I would like the option to have a little bit smaller pack. I'm doing a fly-in caribou goat hunt in September. And for something like that, I think the 5,000 is perfect because we've been working out of a base camp. Even if we spike camp, I'm not going to need 10 days worth of stuff. So I will be able to give you not only my opinions on the prototype 7200, but the production model 5000. And I'll break all that down for you. But I couldn't be happier. And I don't want to be so arrogant as to say I had any influence, but I'll say the guys at Exo are insanely consumer focused. The amount of conversations I have personally had with Mark and Steve, like in-depth conversations where they're drilling me about, okay, this is what happened and then you did what, and then how did it respond? And okay, well, if that's happened, what would you prefer? And like even from the first review I did on the K3, there was issues I had with the K3 that I've seen rectified in the K4. And I know I had an early conversation with Steve and gave some feedback on some items, and I've seen that now change in the production models. So again, I'm not going to be so arrogant as to say like my opinion affected the end design, but I do feel that I was part of a group of individuals who were able to run these packs for an extended period of time. And that as a group, the feedback we gave on the design of these packs was 100% taken into consideration. And there have been changes made because of the people who tested these packs. And that's a big deal for me. I'll tell you right now, I won't be doing like an expedition style backpack review for at least another year because I feel like I've kind of exhausted the market and until I see something significant change. That being said, I do think there's a need for like a everyday carry and maybe a smaller like 3,200 2 to 3 day trip hunting backpack review that I might try and kick off later this summer. Bring anything you didn't need and anything you wish you brought. I not that I can think of. I'm going to be honest with you. Like there was nothing in my pack that I didn't use. For the first half of the trip, I was carrying a bigger toque, like an incinerator from Sitka. Never wore that, so I left that back at the hotel. Did I ever wish I had something that I didn't? I'm pretty meticulous with my notes, and I've been on a hunt exactly like this before, so I think I felt fairly well prepared. If something occurs to me, I'll post about it. Anything you would do differently with campsite selection in winter than other times of the year? Great question. Here's one nice thing. You are not as beholden to find flat ground because you can make it flat yourself. You take a good 10, 15 minutes with a pair of snowshoes, you can make a pretty lopsided piece of ground pretty flat. That being said, take the time to do it because one night I did end up having like a bit of a roll to my pad. And it wasn't that, it was that my feet were just ever so slightly higher than my head. Not to the point where I was getting a headache, but it was enough that it was, kind of annoying. What else in winter? Snow conditions plays a big role because if you lots of times in the timber, the snow can be a little bit more set and exposed. I guess that would be the other thing. The location of the snow is going to dictate how easy or difficult it's going to be to put tent pegs. So that can kind of change where you're going to set up. Actually, the biggest difference is that you don't have to care about water. So when I'm sheep hunting, like water is everything. Water drives every decision you make on a sheep hunt, other than the presence of sheep. Because if you want to go up into the Alpine, but lots of times up in the Alpine, there's no water. So you're like, okay, I can go up there, but I can only stay there for 2 days if I take X amount of liters from down here. Then I'm going to come back down here. Or you could camp at the last known water spot and hike up every day. And like, these are the types of things you're thinking. When the ground is just covered with snow, you can live anywhere. It doesn't matter. And that's one of my favorite things about winter mountain goat hunting is that you don't have to care about water. You just need to make sure you bring enough fuel so that you can melt all the water. You've done the sled. Now any plans for ATV usage this year? 100%. I've been researching ATVs since I got home. The used market is insane. It's like You buy a 10-year-old sled and it's $3,000 less than a brand new sled. Or sorry, you buy a 10-year-old quad and it's $3,000 less than a brand new quad. And it's like, well, that doesn't make any sense, because why don't I buy the quad, drive it for 10 years and sell it and only lose $3,000? You know, like, I feel fairly confident right now I'm going to get the base model Honda Rubicon, which is $11,000. I know it sounds like a lot of money. It's $11,000. It has power steering, manual transmission, independent rear suspension. A lot of people have told me to stay with a straight axle. And after doing a bunch of research, this is primarily a scouting machine for me. Not like, I'm not a guide. I'm not going to have, full moose or full elk or anything like that on this quad on a regular basis. Hopefully I will at some point. But I think the riding comfort, and I want to take my daughter on it, and I want to get my daughter to the point where she can drive it. And I think having a machine with independent rear suspension is going to be easier for her to drive. So that's where I'm at. Storage is a bit of an issue because I can't store things in my backyard because there's no room to pull a machine back there. I'm thinking of maybe paying for storage out in the valley, and I need to buy a trailer because I have a canopy on my truck. And I think I might as well buy a trailer that could also tow a sled, so I don't need to rent a trailer to tow a sled if I borrow one in the wintertime. So that's kind of where I'm at right now with the quad usage. Kurt asks, how did your footwear work out? So I wear La Sportiva Nichol GTX on my winter hunts and my sheep hunts. I've had this pair for 3 years. It's probably my single favorite pair of boots. My feet love being in those boots. They're heavy. They're built for nuclear war. They're overkill maybe for some instances. But when you're on one of these crazy hunts, I would just rather be overbooted as opposed to underbooted. And yeah, I already talked about the Lightnings versus the Atlas Montanes. Somebody else asked about a hot tent. You now know my hot tent. Somebody asked about tips, tricks for drying out your stuff. I will only cover this one more time, and I'll cover it really quickly. When you're trying to run as minimal a setup as possible, you want to use your sleeping system as your dryer. It's so cold and this humidity is so high in these locations, shit doesn't dry hanging it out. You need to use body heat to dry things out. Like even when you get to go glassing, your first instinct is if I leave my jacket off, the air will hit my mid layer and it will evaporate the moisture. But it's so cold and the humidity is so high, the moisture goes nowhere. What you have to do is put on another layer, create more heat, and the heat inside will force the moisture out through the puffy jacket. And you'll know this is working because when you take off your puffy jacket, the outside will be wet. And you're like, well, this doesn't make any sense. How can the outside of my puffy jacket be wet? It's not raining and there's no moisture in the air. It's because that's the moisture that was in your mid layer and your base layer. So use your sleep system, use your puffy layers, put them on immediately, and try and stay as hot as possible when you're not moving so that it forces the moisture out. And invest in really high quality synthetic gear. I don't care if it's from mountaineering companies. I don't care what hunting company it's from. It will make a world of difference. Crampons, what type and how did you like them? I have a pair of Black Diamond saber-tooth crampons. This is the other reason I wear the La Sportiva Nichol GTX is that you need both a toe welt and a heel welt, which is the extra little bits that are like rubber lips, like a little bumper and a tailgate that you can clip the front kind of metal rungs of the crampons to. Highly recommend them. Bulletproof. I've beat the shit out of them. Rock solid. Probably a little heavy, but again, when it comes to gear like that, I don't care. I want stability and insurance and reliability. How did you possibly work with the moisture and wet with your clothing? So I love that this is a common question because clearly it's something people have struggled with, but the solution is so simple. Here's the problem. The solution's highly uncomfortable. The solution depends on you being able to exert enough willpower that you can sit in your sleeping bag, a wet, clammy mess for 3 to 4 hours until things start to feel better. But I'm telling you, also, here's the interesting part. Once you do it, you know it's coming. Like, one of the things I like to do, and I talked about this in the film, on a winter hunt, it gets dark at like 4:30, 5 o'clock. You're not going to bed at 5 o'clock. I'm not going to lay in my tent for 14 hours. So what I will do is I'll set up my tent, I will get in, and I'll have an hour and a half, a 2-hour nap. I might not even really sleep. I just might put on an audiobook and like coast kind of in and out of consciousness and relax. But what I will do during that 2 hours is put everything I have on, get in my quilt and my sleeping bag liner, wrap everything up to my neck, and I'll get 80% of my drying out in that first 2 hours. And then when I wake up or get out of bed to make my dinner at like 8 o'clock, because now I can have like an 8 to 9 break, eat some dinner, listen to a podcast, get a stretch, take a leak. When I get back into my tent at 9, I'm actually ready to go to bed. And now my stuff's like 80% dry. Now I'm comfy, I'm cozy, my tent's ready to go, everything's set up. That's how I like to do things. Somebody wants to know how I picked my spot. I'll be honest with you, I didn't put a whole lot of thought. It was more about availability of tags and length of season. So here's how my filtering process works. First, I want a late season hunt. What units have January, February hunts? Okay, I definitely want to go this year. What units have like a 1-to-1 or close likelihood of drawing? All right, now we're down. Now we got a handful of units. Now let's go on Google Earth and see which areas I think I can hike into. Here's a handful of areas. Throw in your application. Now, I will say one thing that's blown my mind. I didn't really feel like I had a whole lot of connections in the goat hunting world before this hunt. I did the last hunt, and I had a couple. A good buddy, specifically Ricky at a Stewart, has always been incredibly helpful. But like, I didn't really feel like connected in that world. So I didn't even really know if I knew like where the good units were and where the better, goat hunting areas were. Since going on this hunt and having a couple people who are close friends, I really want to extend a note of appreciation to Ty from Wilderness Locals. He was really helpful on this hunt. He was texting with me while I was up there, seeing if he could help look stuff up, and just like moral support alone. He was a really good dude. And while I was out there, he does know a few of these other guys that, are far more experienced. And he put me in touch with them. And these guys have been astounding. Like, I don't know. I almost feel like the goat community is different than the sheep community. I'm not going to say that the sheep community isn't helpful, but they're very secretive, and I think deservedly so. Whereas I feel like the goat community is just way more helpful. Like, I was shocked at some of the stuff these guys were willing to share and were willing to do, and I feel now I'm far more well equipped to pick a good draw area. And also, I'm not in any rush. I got some other stuff I could do during the winter for the next couple of years. I got my eye on a couple of units that are lower draw odds, but much higher producing units and are very huntable in deep winter. And that's what I'm going to be focusing on moving forward. How cold was it? Already said about -5 during the day, -15 at night. Any avalanche gear or training? 0. And I talked about this extensively on a previous podcast, but that influences my decision making. I do not go places that exceed my skill set, okay? So if I look at something and I can't honestly say I feel that's safe with a high degree of confidence, I just don't go. But I was talking, and maybe I'll get into this next. I was talking with a new friend who does have a lot more climbing and a lot more Avi experience. And what I was saying to him is I want to start pushing that area of safety or area of confidence. I want to have more areas in the winter mountains that I feel comfortable in going. So I will be pursuing some Avi training and buying some Avi gear for next year. All right, that's all the questions. So what am I doing for the rest of the season? So it was really interesting. I basically had 2 different areas where I could have went for another solo hunt. And then a friend of a friend reached out, and this guy had pulled a goat tag, and he was supposed to have a few people go with him, and it's a pretty good goat tag, and everyone kept bailing. And this is one of those guys who's like classically always helping other people. He's a guide. I don't even know how many goats this guy's been on. A lot. And so the friend of a friend put us in touch, and I was the one who said to him, I'm like, listen, man, I would be happy to just go on your tag. I said, I know I can go beat the shit out of myself for another week on a solo hunt. I don't know as if I've really learned that much more, or I have that much more intel that's going to put me in a much higher degree likelihood of success than I already was last time. And as I wrapped up the film, I said mentorship and being around more experienced hunters is the theme for 2023. I don't even care if I put any animals on the ground in 2023. What I care about is that I start filling some of the skill gaps in my skill set. So I'm still waiting on 100% confirmation. He's got some ride stuff he needs to work out, but as long as everything works out, I'm going to be going out with this other guy. I will be filming it. I will get into more details, but I'm going to help him out. I'm going to use my last week of goat hunting to help him out. Because I think he's a cool guy, and I think it'll be great to, help someone, get an animal. I think it's something I'd like to spend more time doing moving forward. And B, from a selfish perspective, I think I'm going to learn a lot, and I think I'll be that much more equipped to go do cooler goat hunts in the future. All right. That's all I got. Thank you as always for taking the time. As I said at the beginning of the podcast, if you can engage with the platform in any way, shape, or form, like, comment, share, subscribe, post your Insta stories, all that stuff is super helpful. If you want to join Mindful Reviews, mindful-reviews.com. Spotting scope review should be coming out in a couple weeks. Then I'm going to be auctioning off the winning spotting scope. Only members are going to be allowed to buy raffle tickets. Sorry, not auctioning off. I will be raffling off the winning spotting scope. Only members qualify to buy raffle tickets for that spotting scope or for any of the things that I raffle off. Any questions, jay@mindfulhunter.com, Instagram mindful_hunter. Always here. Let me know what you need. And as always, thanks for tuning in.